3 weeks ago, a whole crowd of polo shirt warriors showed up at my fence, screaming for me to open my gate for the HOA. I sat in a lawn chair, cracked a cold beer, and held up a scorecard, gave them a 7.5 for terrible synchronization. They thought I was just some stubborn ranch guy. They had no idea I had 4K cameras, receipts, and a whistleblower ready to burn their whole HOA to the ground. I said 3 words: my land, my rules. But to understand how we got to that circus, you need to understand 2 things: the land and my grandfather. Folks around here like to say Texas soil remembers things. It remembers boots, storms, hooves, and trouble. And if you stay long enough, it remembers you too. I've lived on this 12-acre patch just east of town for most of my life. Not all in one stretch. Life dragged me off a few times. Like it does to everyone. But, like a man who is worn out every other road, I always ended up back here. The land was waiting. The house, a squat, stubborn structure older than most marriages in this county, leaned a little to the west, like it had all the time in the world. And maybe it did. My grandfather, Earl, built the first version of this place with his own 2 hands. He believed a man wasn't worth much unless he left something behind that could stand up to a good wind. Out here, winds don't ask permission. They just come. He used to say, "Boy, you don't just own land, you take care of it, so it'll take care of you." I believed him then, and I believe him even more now. Because this land, this fence line, this gravel road, this old workshop that smells like diesel and cedar, it did take care of me. The driveway alone is a 1/4 mile long. Most of it is still the same gravel my grandfather laid down in 1967 with a rented grader and a mule that hated mornings. It runs up from the county road, curls around a stand of pecan trees, and ends at a heavy iron gate with my last name welded across the middle. The kind of gate that says, without raising its voice, "Turn around unless you were invited." Most folks around here respect that. Most of the older ones prefer it. Privacy's a rare commodity these days, same as quiet. But on my land, quiet didn't visit. Quiet lived here. Mornings started slow. Coffee on the porch, dogs at my feet, sun rising soft and orange behind the cedars. Sometimes I'd sit long enough to watch the dust settle on the road, knowing full well nobody was coming up it unless they meant to. That kind of peace. You don't measure it in minutes, you measure it in breaths. My workshop sat off to the side, long and low, added onto bit by bit every time my grandfather got bored or irritated. Inside were tools that had outlived most of the men who bought them, a tractor that only ran because stubbornness seems to be hereditary, and a whole family of half-finished projects waiting on me to decide what mattered and what didn't. Life wasn't fancy, didn't need to be. I had space, I had quiet. I had enough distance between me and the next living soul that I could drink coffee in my underwear and not worry about anybody calling the sheriff. That's a kind of freedom they don't sell in subdivisions. And for a long time, nobody bothered me. The mail came when it came. The dogs barked when they felt like it. The seasons rolled past in their own slow rhythm, and the only rules that mattered were the ones written into the dirt. Then Clearwater Ridge showed up. It started with survey flags, little orange and pink markers that sprouted across the road like weeds. Then came the trucks, the concrete, the framing crews. Within a year, there it was, a full-blown HOA development, popping up out of nowhere like a prefab infection. They called it Clearwater Ridge, which was funny because there isn't a clear anything within 10 miles of this place. Just scrub, dust, and a creek that only remembers it's a creek when it rains too much. They built those houses fast. Too fast, all lined up behind a white stucco wall and a big decorative sign with swoopy cursive letters. Looked like a gated utopia for people who wanted their world pre-approved and pre-packaged. Out here, we call that decoration for people who don't trust themselves. Running that little kingdom was their president, Karen Sterling. You've seen her type in 100 places. Only difference is this one had a title, haircut sharp, clothes pressed flatter than her sense of humor, and a voice that could turn the word community into a warning. At public meetings, she probably called herself a steward of neighborhood order. To me, she just looked like someone who believed rules were holy as long as she wrote every single one. At first, I ignored them. They stayed on their side of the road, and I stayed on mine. They could fuss over lawn heights and fence colors all day long. I didn't care. Their world was matching mailboxes and newsletter drama. My world was busted knuckles and a gate that only swung for the right people. But there was one problem: geography. The back half of their community ran straight into rough country: brush, rocks, uneven ground. No easy way in for big trucks, emergency vehicles, or any of the other toys a shiny new HOA likes to parade around. The only logical access was my southern gate, the one that opened onto my private gravel road. The road my grandfather carved into this land with sweat, diesel, and bad language. They looked at that road and saw convenience. I looked at it and saw my family's backbone. They wanted it. I said no. Simple as that. But with people like that, no isn't an answer, it's a challenge. And that's when the trouble really started. They didn't waste any time. Just 3 days after Clearwater Ridge held their ribbon-cutting ceremony, I spotted movement at my southern gate. 2 men in reflective vests and one in a crisp navy polo were standing there like they were waiting for someone to sign their permission slip. Even from halfway down the drive, I could tell who was in charge. Clipboard guy. Shoulders back, chin high, smile that was half salesman, half threat. The type who had never lifted anything heavier than his own ego. I walked down slow, wiping grease off my hands with the same rag I'd used earlier that morning. The dogs followed behind me like deputies. Clipboard guy stepped forward with a smile so bright it should have come with a dimmer switch. "Good morning, sir. We're with Clearwater Ridge Community Logistics. We'd like to request temporary access through your gate for a few days. Construction trucks, equipment deliveries, it'll save us a lot of trouble." He said it like he was doing me a favor. I looked at the gate behind them, then back at him. "This gate?" I asked. "Yes, sir," he said, nodding like the papers were already signed. One of the other men added, "Concrete trucks come Friday. Your road's the only direct access." I folded my rag neatly, not for cleanliness, but because silence makes people show who they really are. "This road isn't public," I said. "It's on my deed, and it's not on your plans. You know that." Clipboard's smile twitched, just a hairline crack, but I saw it. "We can make it worth your while," he said, dropping the neighbor act. "The HOA is prepared to compensate generously." I shook my head. Slow, clear, final. "I've already told your president I'm not interested," I said. "This isn't a logistics problem. It's a boundaries problem." Clipboard opened his mouth, probably to give me some memorized HOA speech, but I didn't let him. I cut him off, not angry, just finished. My land, my rules. The air changed, not a gust, not a breeze, just that deep, quiet shift when somebody realizes the answer isn't going to change. The friendly faces slipped off them like poorly glued masks. Clipboard flipped to a new page in his folder. "You might regret that," he murmured. I smiled, but mine wasn't friendly. "You boys are standing on private property without permission," I said. "That's trespassing. This conversation is over." I pulled out my phone and hit the sheriff's non-emergency line. Their posture changed instantly, stiff, defensive, frustrated. They left before Deputy Miller arrived, tires chewing up the gravel loud enough to sound like a warning. Miller took my report with a small sigh, the kind that belongs to a man who knows trouble doesn't knock just once. "Overzealous suburban types," he muttered, but his eyes said it plain. He knew this wouldn't be the last time he drove up my road. The next morning proved him right. I stepped outside to find HOA pamphlets wedged in my gate hinges, tucked in my mailbox, and scattered across the gravel like someone tried to toilet paper my property with glossy propaganda. Bold red headlines screamed, "Blocking community infrastructure, endangering public safety. He's putting us all at risk." They even slapped together a website. I didn't get mad, didn't shout, didn't throw anything. I just added another lock to the gate, welded a second bracket onto the post, and mounted a new camera on the east fence line. If they wanted a fight, they were about to learn something important. They picked the wrong man, on the wrong land, on the wrong damn day. The kind of silence that settled over my property after that gate confrontation wasn't peaceful. It wasn't restful. It was the kind of quiet that watches you from the tree line, waiting to see what you'll do next. And I knew exactly what the HOA would do next. People like that don't hear the word no. They translate it into try harder. So I got ready. I spent 2 full days upgrading every camera on my property. Thermal sensors, night vision lenses, motion triggers, everything wired into a closed-loop system with cloud backups every half hour. Not because I was paranoid, because I'd lived long enough to know that trouble rarely announces itself politely twice. And right on schedule, trouble arrived. At 2:31 a.m., my phone buzzed once on the nightstand. A silent alert, motion along the east fence. I rolled out of bed, slipped on my boots, grabbed my jacket, and stepped outside into the cold night air. No panic, no rush, just a slow, steady walk toward the workshop while I checked the feed on my phone. 2 figures, dressed in black, moving along my fence line like they were rehearsing for a community theater burglary. One carried a flashlight pointed low, the other carried a toolkit big enough to tell me this wasn't curiosity. They were here to break something. I hit the silent alarm. Floodlights near the front gate hummed awake at half strength, just enough to illuminate them without tipping them off that I was watching. They reached the gate. The one with the toolkit pulled out a handheld grinder, flipped it on, and pressed it to the steel lock. Sparks shot out like angry fireflies. He wasn't getting through. That lock was triple reinforced steel, welded into armored shielding, but the attempt alone said everything I needed to know about their intentions. Then the second guy handed him a folded piece of paper. Under the flashlight beam, I saw the header. Looked like a court order, or someone's late-night attempt at forging one. And the badge on his vest? Riverbend Enforcement Officer. A position that doesn't exist anywhere except in the imagination of an HOA president who thinks she runs her own country. I didn't yell, didn't rush in, didn't try to scare them off. Sometimes the smartest move is to let people record their own guilt in 1080p. From behind the tractor shed, I filmed everything. The grinder, the fake paperwork, the cosplay badge, every stupid decision they made in the name of compliance. Then I saw the glow of headlights cresting the far ridge. Red and blue lights followed. Deputy Miller and another patrol unit rolled up fast, tires spitting dust. The moment the deputies saw sparks flying off my gate, they hit the loudspeaker. "Hands up! Step away from the property!" Grinder Boy dropped the tool like it bit him. His partner tried to run, made it about 15 feet before falling face first into the mud with a sound that did wonders for my mood. By the time I stepped out into the light, they were both cuffed on the ground. Miller glanced at me. "Mr. Saltz," he said, "this happen often?" Before I could answer, Grinder Boy spoke up, panic pouring out faster than the lies. "Wait! Wait! This is a misunderstanding," he yelled, his face mashed into the gravel. "Karen said it was authorized. She said we had immunity. She promised she'd handle the paperwork." His partner groaned. "Dude, stop talking." Miller didn't react much, but he tapped the microphone clipped to his vest. A very deliberate tap. Translation: "Your confession is coming through loud and clear. Keep talking." I shrugged. "Only when the HOA gets creative," I said. Miller didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched just enough for me to know he understood. This wasn't a one-off problem. This was the start of a war. Deputy Miller didn't waste time. Once the 2 intruders were cuffed, he called in the second unit to secure the scene and bag the fake court order. The younger deputy picked it up with latex gloves like it might bite him. Even from 3 feet away, you could see the document was bad. The font was wrong. The notary's stamp looked like it had been run through a cheap copier. And the signature, well, if whoever forged it was trying to imitate a judge, they must have done it while riding in the back of a truck going 30 miles an hour. The deputy held it up toward Miller. "You seeing this?" Miller nodded once, slow, the kind of nod men give when they've found the problem they hoped they wouldn't. He turned back to the 2 on the ground. "All right, boys," he said. "Help me understand something. Why the grinder? Why the forged paperwork? Why 2 in the morning?" They both stayed quiet at first. The kind of quiet that comes when you realize the hand you were playing isn't a winning one. Then Grinder Boy cracked again. "I told you, Karen said it was authorized," he shouted. "She said she'd handle immunity, paperwork, all of it. We were told this was just a formality." The other guy swore under his breath. "Man, shut up." Miller didn't respond. He just adjusted his vest, making sure the body cam had a clean angle, and said, "Who's Karen?" "Karen Sterling, HOA president," the man blurted. "She hired us, said she needed early access to the road, called it, expedited compliance operations." Miller blinked once. "That's not a thing," he said. "HOAs don't have enforcement officers. They don't issue court orders." And they sure as hell don't authorize break-ins at 2:30 in the morning. The other deputy was already radioing in the details. I didn't say a word. Didn't need to. Everything was falling neatly into place without my help. Once the deputies loaded the two men into the patrol cars, Miller motioned me over. "You got footage of this?" he asked. "All angles," I said. "Night vision, audio, and a nice close-up of their little cosplay badges." Miller exhaled, long and low. "Good. Sheriff's office is going to need copies. This isn't just trespassing anymore. Fake documents, impersonating officials, attempted forced entry. These boys are in deep." He paused, then added, "And if what they said about this Karen woman is true, she might be in deeper." I nodded. Figured as much. He climbed into his cruiser, hand resting lightly on the door. "Get that footage to the station in the morning," he said, "and lock that gate down tight until we sort this out." Already planned to. They drove off, the lights fading into the dark like the end of a long exhale. I stood by the gate for a while, letting the night settle around me again, watching the wind carry away the faint smell of burnt metal. A man can feel it in his bones when a line's been crossed. And tonight, someone had stomped on mine with both boots. By sunrise, I'd compiled every second of footage, synced the audio, and delivered it all to the sheriff's office. They didn't need to ask twice. Evidence like that doesn't sit in a man's pocket. It belongs in hands that can do something with it. By noon, the investigation was official. By 4 p.m., the HOA released a statement, a shiny PDF posted on their website, emailed to residents, even taped to the entry gate of Clearwater Ridge. It read, "The Riverbend Homeowners Association distances itself from the unlawful actions of an independent contractor. We are shocked and disappointed by this individual's behavior, which does not reflect our commitment to community safety." Translated into plain language, we didn't think he'd get caught, but they weren't done, not even close. That evening, I found freshly printed pamphlets scattered across my fence line again. This time, they weren't about infrastructure or safety. These ones were about me. Accusations, speculation, warnings to residents about hostile behavior from the landowner across the road. One of them even had a blurry, zoomed-in photo of my gate with fake crime scene tape poorly photoshopped onto it. The kind of editing job you'd expect from a teenager trying to pass a meme as evidence. I almost laughed. Almost. But something inside me went quiet instead. Quiet and steady, in a way that told me the HOA had no idea what kind of man they were poking. You don't spend your life protecting what's yours, just to let a pack of polo shirt bureaucrats rewrite reality. They thought I'd back down. They thought I'd fold. They thought fear would work where bribery didn't. But all they did that night was show me exactly how far they were willing to go, and that meant the next move was mine. It didn't take long for the HOA to escalate. They'd already tried charm, threats, forged paperwork, and a midnight break-in. The next logical step, apparently, was public theater. 2 mornings after their "we're shocked and disappointed" PR stunt, I walked out onto my porch with a fresh cup of coffee and saw something I hadn't seen in 20 years on this road. A crowd. About a dozen of them, clustered along the edge of my fence line like a flock of confused flamingos. They stayed just far enough back to avoid trespassing, but close enough to make sure I saw every last one of their homemade signs. "Let us through!" "Emergency access saves lives." "Share the road, Salts." One woman even had a neon poster that read, "Don't be selfish, think of the community." It had glitter on it, actual glitter, at 7 in the morning. I didn't respond, didn't yell, didn't walk over. Instead, I grabbed a lawn chair, a handful of beef jerky, and a cooler with 2 cold beers. Set myself down under the pecan tree like I was watching a 4th of July parade. After a minute, I walked back inside and returned with a small dry erase board. Big red marker. Thick strokes. I held it up. 7.5. The crowd went quiet for a second. Then an older man near the front shouted, "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" I raised my voice just enough to carry. "Your marching is off beat," I called back. "If you're gonna protest, at least get in sync. Arms, knees, rhythm." A couple of them huffed. A few muttered. One woman gasped like she'd been personally victimized. I took another bite of jerky, leaned back, and added, "Come on, show me some effort." Half the crowd didn't know whether to be offended or embarrassed. The other half clearly didn't know why they were even there. But here's the thing about this kind of crowd. It's never the loud ones you worry about. It's the quiet one, the one looking around like he's checking for witnesses. Sure enough, around mid-morning, a man arrived who didn't match the HOA retiree aesthetic. Late 40s, ball cap pulled low, polo shirt 2 sizes too tight, shoulders tense. He walked straight up to the gate like he had a warrant in his pocket. Started taking pictures, first of the gate, then of my house, then of me. I stood up slow, making sure my hands were visible, and my GoPro camera, strapped to my cap, was already blinking red. "Can I help you?" I asked. He ignored me, took another photo, zoomed in this time. I repeated, firmer, "Sir, you're on the easement line. Step back." Instead of stepping back, he stepped closer. "You the land hog?" he shouted. "The guy blocking ambulances? The guy putting families at risk?" I stayed still, calm, not a hint of anger. "This is private property," I said. "You need to step away from the gate." He moved in again, way too close, and threw a dramatic swipe at my shoulder. Not a punch, not contact, just a theatrical brush of fingertips across my jacket. Then he dropped to the ground like I'd shot him. He clutched his face, started screaming. "He hit me! He assaulted me! Call the cops!" Phones came up fast. People shouted. Someone screamed, "Oh my God, did you see that?" But all I did was point to the tiny blinking red light on my cap. The GoPro. Recording everything. Every second. I didn't even have to say anything. The lie was already unraveling. The man who threw himself into the dirt kept screaming like he'd been tackled by a bull instead of gravity and bad acting. He rolled around clutching his face, shouting for someone to call the police, insisting I'd attacked him without provocation. A woman with a pink visor gasped like she'd witnessed a murder. Another one shouted, "That's assault! I saw it!" Even though she'd been looking at her phone a moment earlier. I didn't move, didn't go near him, didn't bother defending myself. I simply tapped the side of my cap, right where the GoPro was mounted, the little red recording light blinking slow and steady. Evidence speaks louder than panic. By the time the sheriff's deputy rolled up, same one as before, Deputy Miller, the actor was still on the ground groaning dramatically, holding a tissue under his nose even though there wasn't a single drop of blood. Miller stepped out of his cruiser with the calm of a man who's seen every dumb trick people can try to pull. He looked at the crowd, then at the man on the ground, then at me. "All right," he said. "What happened?" The actor bolted upright like someone hit a switch. "He assaulted me," he shouted. "He just came up and shoved me. I want to press charges." Miller nodded slowly, like he was letting the words float in the air for a moment, before deciding where to file them. "You want to press charges?" "Absolutely," the man snapped, pointing at me like he'd just identified the killer in a cheap courtroom drama. Miller turned to me. "You got footage?" I didn't say a word, just reached up, unclipped the GoPro, and handed it over. Then I gestured toward the gate. "And the security camera has a clean angle too," I added. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Phones lowered, expressions changed. Miller walked back to his cruiser, plugged the GoPro into his tablet, and began reviewing the footage. The crowd grew quiet. Even the actor stopped groaning. I watched Miller's face while he watched the video. His eyebrows didn't move. He didn't sigh, didn't smirk, just watched. Then he replayed the moment in slow motion. And that was it. Case closed. He stepped out of the cruiser holding the tablet at his side. "Sir," he said to the actor, "you want to change your statement?" The man hesitated, eyes darting to the crowd. But pride is a dangerous thing. He lifted his chin. Well, maybe it wasn't that bad." Miller cut him off. "Turn around." "What?" "Turn around," Miller repeated, already unclipping his cuffs. The crowd rippled with shock. A few people backed up. One woman whispered, "Oh my God, oh my God." The actor sputtered, "What do you think you're doing?" He assaulted me." "No, sir," Miller said, voice flat. "You filed a false police report, and you attempted to defraud law enforcement. That's a crime." He clicked the cuffs shut around the man's wrists and guided him toward the cruiser. The same people who'd been chanting half an hour earlier were now folding up their signs, avoiding eye contact, shuffling back to their parked SUVs like kids sneaking out after curfew. One woman muttered under her breath, "I didn't know they were going to do that." "Sure, lady, whatever you need to tell yourself." As they loaded the actor into the back seat, someone shouted from the retreating crowd, "We didn't sign up for this." but they had. They just didn't expect the script to fall apart so fast. As the cruiser pulled away, Miller gave me a look, one part apology, one part warning. "This is getting out of hand," he said quietly. "You should be careful." I nodded. "Careful's my specialty," I said. He didn't argue, he just drove off. And the fence line was quiet again. Too quiet. Because if the HOA was desperate enough to stage an assault, they weren't near done. They were just warming up. Trouble has a sound. It's not yelling or fighting or even gunfire. It's that slow, heavy crunch of rubber on gravel, followed by a deep diesel rumble your gut recognizes before your ears do. I heard that sound the next morning. I was elbows deep in the guts of an old Massey Ferguson tractor when the noise rolled across the property like a warning. Not a pickup, not a delivery truck. This thing had weight behind it. Purpose. I stepped outside, wiping my hands on a rag. And there it was. A bright yellow excavator. Crawler tracks grinding across the ground on the far side of my fence. 3 men in reflective vests walked beside it, one holding a clipboard, one carrying orange survey flags, and another with a can of fluorescent spray paint. They didn't look confused. They didn't look lost. They looked like men who'd been told, confidently, that they were allowed to be here. I walked straight toward the fence line, not slow, not fast, just the calm walk of someone who owns the dirt under their boots. The clipboard man noticed me approaching and put on the friendliest face he could manage. "Morning, sir," he called out. "We're just prepping for a temporary access lane, only surface grading, nothing structural." I stared at him. On whose authority? He looked at his clipboard like the answer might magically appear. "Per community project management directives, temporary equipment route." "That's funny," I said, stepping right up to the fence, "because this land belongs to me, and no one gave me a damn thing to sign." He shifted his weight, eyes flicking toward the others for support. "Sir, we were told this was pre-approved." "By who?" I asked. A pause, a swallow, then, "Karen." I tilted my head slightly. Never heard of her. Before he could respond, the guy with the spray paint bent down and marked a bright orange X directly on my fence post. Right on my line, not near it, not close to it, on it. "My post," I said quietly. The man with the paint froze mid-motion, like he'd just realized his entire paycheck depended on pretending he didn't hear me. Behind him, the excavator operator leaned out of the cab. "You want us to go ahead with the first cut?" he called. "No," I said, then louder. "Nobody touches that fence." The clipboard man tried to smile again, but this time it looked more like a man trying not to throw up. "Sir, please, we were assured." I pulled out my phone. "Let me help you with that assurance," I said. Then I dialed the sheriff. And right after that, the county zoning office. While we waited, I recorded everything. The flags, the paint, the documents, the machine idling like a loaded threat. The workers tried to look busy without making things worse. Some paced, some pretended to measure things that didn't exist. One guy just stared at his boots like he could disappear if he wished hard enough. 45 minutes later, the county inspector arrived, a tired man with glasses and boots, older than the entire Clearwater Ridge development. He walked the site with me, checked the flags, looked at the paint, scanned the perimeter, then he frowned. "You boys got a permit?" he asked the workers. Silence. "You got survey markers?" he continued. More silence. "You got anything at all that says you're allowed to be here?" The clipboard man's voice cracked. "We were told—" "That's not what I asked," the inspector snapped. When the sheriff's deputy arrived, different one this time, the workers backed away from the fence faster than I'd ever seen grown men retreat. "Sir," the deputy said to me, "looks like you caught them before they did any damage." I nodded. "Damage isn't the issue," I said. "Intent is." The deputy didn't disagree, and just like that, the workers packed up, flags pulled, spray paint capped, excavator crawling backward like a scolded dog. But the damage was done, not to my land, but to the HOA's strategy. Because today, they'd shown their hand. This wasn't miscommunication. This wasn't confusion. This was a coordinated attempt to push through my boundary using equipment, hired crews, and a lie. And that meant one thing. They weren't trying to negotiate anymore. They were trying to take. By the time evening rolled around, the air had that heavy stillness that comes right before a thunderstorm. Not in the sky, in people. I could tell something was brewing. The excavator incident had rattled someone at Clearwater Ridge. The workers had left like men fleeing a haunted house. The inspector had left shaking his head. The deputy had left irritated and suspicious. And somewhere over in that HOA clubhouse, I knew at least one person finally realized. Karen Sterling had crossed a line they couldn't follow her across. I just didn't know who it was yet. Around 9 p.m., I was closing up the workshop when I heard footsteps approaching the gate. Not the clumsy, entitled stomp of an HOA officer, not the quiet skulk of a trespasser. This was hesitant, uneven, like a man walking towards something he didn't want to face. The dogs didn't bark. They just lifted their heads and watched. I stepped out with a flashlight and angled the beam toward the road. A man stood there, pressed khakis, button-down shirt, laptop bag slung over one shoulder. He looked familiar, but only in the way you recognize someone from across a grocery store aisle. He lifted a hand. "Mr. Saltz? May I talk to you a moment?" His voice trembled, but not from cold, more from knowing he shouldn't be here. I opened the gate halfway and stepped out, keeping a healthy 3 feet between us. "That depends," I said. "Who are you?" He swallowed hard. "My name is Tyler Manning. I'm the treasurer for Clearwater Ridge." I didn't let my face show anything. But inside, something clicked. This wasn't a man coming over with a warning. This was a man coming over with a burden. He looked over his shoulder twice before continuing. "I didn't come as a board member," he said quickly. "I came as a homeowner, and I need you to understand. I'm not here to argue about the road or access or any of that. I just can't be part of what's happening anymore." He wiped his palms on his pants like he was sweating through the fabric. I didn't rush him, didn't offer comfort, just waited. Men always reveal things the moment you stop talking. He exhaled shakily. "You're not the villain they're painting you as," he said. "And what happened today? That excavator? That wasn't an accident. Karen authorized it. She told the board it was pre-negotiated and pending county approval." He shook his head hard. "I checked. None of that was true." I nodded once. "Keep talking." Tyler opened his laptop bag and took out a small envelope. Thick, stuffed. He offered it toward me like it might burn him if he held it too long. Inside was a USB drive and a stack of printed emails. "I shouldn't have this," he whispered. "And if she finds out I copied it, she'll destroy me." He took a shaky breath. She already tried. Now he had my attention. Tyler looked down, ashamed. "Look, as treasurer, I'm responsible for keeping our financials clean. Normal stuff, dues, maintenance, vendor contracts. But over the last 6 months, there have been discrepancies." He ran a hand through his hair. "Large payments, off-book transfers, accounts labeled security operations and resolution strategy, 40,000 here, 60,000 there, some routed through shell companies, some paid in cash." I raised an eyebrow. "And who authorized them?" His voice cracked. "Karen." Then he corrected himself. "Only Karen." He looked up at me, eyes apologetic, terrified, and exhausted. "Mr. Saltz, there's over 300,000 missing." The numbers didn't surprise me. The desperation in his voice did. He stepped closer, still holding the envelope between us. "She told the board that these were expenses for community protection, legal prep, conflict mitigation, but the charges don't match. The vendors aren't real. The invoices are fabricated. And you're coming to me," I said slowly, "because..." He locked eyes with me, finally. "Because she's going to blame me." There it was, the real motive. Not conscience, not heroism, survival. Tyler's voice broke. "She's already set the narrative. I found an email she drafted, a statement saying that I acted alone, that I mismanaged funds, that I authorized contractors without board consent." He swallowed again. "But I didn't authorize anything. She forged my initials on 2 of the transfers." I stayed silent. Let him keep spilling. "When the break-in happened," he said softly, "the fake court order, the badges, the grinder, that wasn't some rogue contractor. That was paid through an account Karen opened herself." I checked the ledger. He closed his eyes for a moment. "Tonight she called an emergency closed session. I wasn't invited, but one of the board members leaked me a message. She said, and I quote," he pulled a folded printout from his pocket and handed it to me, highlighted in red, "We can outlast him legally. Even if we're in the wrong, the pressure will make him cave. And if anything goes sideways, the treasurer will take the fall." Tyler looked like a man who had been standing on thin ice for too long. "I can't risk prison for something I didn't do," he whispered, "and I can't let her drag the community into this. So, I brought you everything." He motioned at the envelope. "It's all there. Emails, meeting transcripts, transaction logs, copies of forged approvals, plans for the break-in, plans for the excavator stunt. Plans for more." I held the envelope but didn't open it. Not yet. "I shouldn't be here," he said, voice shaking again. "If Karen finds out I talked to you—" "She won't," I said. He nodded, though it didn't give him much comfort. Before turning to leave, he paused. "You're not the only one she's hurt," he said quietly. "You're just the only one who's not afraid of her." I watched him walk back toward the development, a man who had finally chosen a side, even if he hated that it had come to this. The night swallowed him up. I stood there alone, envelope in hand, knowing one thing with absolute certainty. Karen Sterling didn't just pick a fight. She picked the wrong enemy. Word travels differently in a small town. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Like wind carrying dust, like creek water finding the easiest path. By the next morning, half the county had heard something about an excavator, a forged court order, or a HOA incident near my fence line. Depends who you asked. Some folks were curious, some skeptical, some downright nosy. And instead of letting Karen spin the story into whatever bedtime horror version she preferred, I decided to put everything out in the open. I sent a dozen short emails, 3 to local reporters I trusted, a few to neighbors, a few to people who'd ask questions in town. The email was simple. "I will be hosting a community transparency open house this Saturday at my property. All are welcome to ask questions. Documentation provided. Bring whoever you want." No anger, no drama, no shouting, just sunlight. And sunlight is the one thing people like Karen can't survive. The morning of the event rolled in hot and windy. I set up 2 pop-up tents at the mouth of my driveway, one over a table covered in neatly arranged documents, the other manned by 2 of the kids I'd been mentoring in the workshop. They offered free blade sharpening for mowers and garden tools, which brought more people than I expected. Nothing unites a community like free service and cold water. By 10 o'clock, the first visitors arrived, a retired couple from the next county over, a dad with 2 little kids who just wanted to see the tractor, a man who lived 3 houses into Clearwater Ridge and confessed he didn't trust the newsletters anymore. Then the reporters came, not the big city ones who parachute in with fancy microphones and leave before learning anyone's name. The local folks who grew up here, who know land boundaries better than some surveyors, who understand the smell of diesel and pecan trees. They asked straightforward questions, and I gave straightforward answers. I walked them along the fence line, pointing to the post where the paint mark had been sprayed. I showed where the excavator had sat. I explained the history of the road, how my grandfather carved it with a rented grader in 1967, how the deed had been in our family longer than Clearwater Ridge had been on a county map. Inside the tent, I laid out maps, historical plat maps, title transfers, tax receipts dating back half a century. The kind of paperwork people over 55 respect because it means something. It's not digital, it's not altered, it's lived experience pressed into ink and stamps. Beside that were laminated copies of the Clearwater Ridge buyer agreement, with one line highlighted in bright orange, southern ingress and egress not guaranteed or implied. Folks read it and shook their heads. One man muttered, "They bought houses without reading this." Another said, "Sounds like someone lied to them." I didn't add anything, didn't need to. The documents spoke for themselves. Tyler Manning showed up too. No HOA name tag this time, no pressed khakis, just jeans and a t-shirt like a normal man trying to stay out of the sun. He hung back near the edge of the tent, avoiding reporters, occasionally glancing over his shoulder as if expecting Karen to appear with a clipboard full of consequences. He didn't talk much, but the look in his eyes told me enough. He was done with the HOA, done with the lies, done with the fear. Around noon, a few Clearwater Ridge residents started appearing in 2s and 3s. Some came out of curiosity, some out of guilt, some because their conscience had finally gotten louder than their Facebook group. One woman approached me slowly, holding her purse like a shield. "I'm sorry," she said. "We didn't know. We thought you were being unreasonable." I nodded politely. "I'm not here to rub anyone's nose in it. I just want the truth out." She let out a breath she'd probably been holding for weeks. "Well," she said, "today helped." By late afternoon, the crowd had grown enough that my driveway felt almost festive. Kids ran around chasing each other. Coffee thermoses clinked. My apprentices sharpened mower blades fast enough to earn tips. And the reporters scribbled notes while the sun lit up the paperwork on the tables like evidence on display. But the most important change wasn't the people who came. It was the people who didn't. The HOA's Access Now Facebook group went dead silent. No signs, no protesters, no staged drama. Karen Sterling had vanished from public view. Either she was regrouping or she was panicking. Both possibilities worked in my favor. As the last visitors trickled out and the sun dipped behind the cedars, I packed up the documents, folded the tents, and stood quietly in the cooling air. For the first time since this whole mess started, the wind didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a shift, a turning, a sign that the story wasn't about a gate anymore. It was about truth finally getting loud enough to drown out the lies. And the next move wouldn't be mine. It would be Karen's, and it would be her worst one yet. The Travis County Courthouse has a smell to it. Old paper, dry wood polish, recycled air, and tension, the kind you can feel in your teeth. I arrived early, pressed shirt, clean boots, the kind of clothes my grandfather saved for serious days. Inside the courtroom, the HOA legal team sat clustered together like they were sharing one nervous system. Matching suits, matching notebooks, matching fear. And Karen Sterling sat at the center of them, jaw tight enough to crack a tooth. She wouldn't look at me. Behind her sat the treasurer, Tyler Manning, different from last time I saw him, not hiding, not scared, just finished. The judge entered, sharp eyes, silver hair, no patience for nonsense. Riverbend HOA versus Mr. Soltz. Petition for temporary access easement. Counsel, proceed. The HOA went first. Their lawyer stood up with a rehearsed smile and started his performance. Aerial photos, hypothetical emergency scenarios, flowcharts full of arrows. He even tried to argue that my locked gate endangered regional resilience, whatever that meant. Then came their expert, a man who spoke in corporate soup, all filler, no substance. Finally, they submitted a set of staged images showing an ambulance blocked by my gate, something that never happened. Karen nodded along like a bobblehead. Then Miss Davis stood, and everything changed. She moved with the calm of a surgeon who already knows how the operation ends. First, my deed. Then, the 1967 plat map. Then, 55 years of tax receipts on the private road. Next, she displayed photos of the excavator trespassing, the paint marks on my fence post, the flags, the workers. The judge leaned forward. Then Miss Davis said, "And when trespass failed, Your Honor, they escalated." She tapped her laptop. The lights dimmed. The nighttime break-in footage filled the courtroom screen, the grinder throwing sparks, the fake Riverbend enforcement officer badge, the forged court order with mismatched fonts and an invalid notary stamp. The HOA team shrank. And when criminal entry didn't get the result they wanted, she clicked again. The helmet cam video played, the man in the polo shirt, the staged shouting, the weak swing, the dramatic collapse into the dirt like he'd been shot by invisible lightning. A few people in the gallery snorted. Someone whispered, "Good Lord." The judge's face didn't move, which somehow made it scarier. Miss Davis placed another document on the projector. "Here," she said, "is the $500 payment receipt for that man's appearance fee, authorized by President Sterling." Karen went white. "And now," Miss Davis said, "the foundation of this dispute." She submitted the Clearwater Ridge Buyers Agreement, the one every resident had signed. The judge's eyes halted at the highlighted line, "Southern ingress and egress not guaranteed or implied." The entire courtroom went still. "Ms. Sterling," the judge said, "were homeowners informed of this clause?" Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Then Miss Davis gestured toward the bench. "Your Honor, the treasurer of the HOA board wishes to testify." Tyler stood, walked to the front, raised his right hand, swore in. He looked at me once, nodded, then faced the judge. "Mr. Manning," Miss Davis began gently, "tell the court what you discovered." Tyler swallowed hard. "President Sterling misrepresented that clause to homeowners. She said the Southern Road was negotiated and pending approval. She withheld board votes, and she authorized harassment payments disguised as contractor fees. Miss Davis handed him a page. And what was the total amount of these unauthorized expenditures? The room held its breath. Tyler looked down at the number. His voice was barely above a whisper, but the microphone carried it clear. $300,000. Gasps echoed. The judge's chin lifted slightly, the judicial version of raising hell. Miss Davis pressed, "And when you questioned President Sterling about these missing funds, what happened?" Tyler's voice steadied. "She told me she'd pin it on me, said I'd be the fall guy, said the treasurer always goes down first." Karen lurched to her feet. "That's a lie. He's twisting." The judge slammed her gavel so hard half the room jumped. "Sit. Down." Karen sank like her bones had melted. Miss Davis finished cleanly. "Your Honor, this petition is not about access. It is about control, retaliation, falsified authority, and financial misconduct." The judge didn't take long. The HOA's petition is denied with prejudice. Furthermore, based on the evidence of document tampering, staged incidents, and the alleged misappropriation of $300,000 of community funds, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal review. Karen looked like she'd been unplugged. Her lawyers stared at the floor. The gallery murmured. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I simply breathed. A long, steady exhale I'd been holding for months. The war wasn't over, but the battlefield had shifted. And now, Karen wasn't the hunter anymore. She was the prey. 2 days after the hearing, the air around my place felt different. Not peaceful, just quiet in a way that suggested the other side wasn't plotting anymore. They were scrambling. I didn't have to wait long to confirm it. Early that morning, just after the sun burned through the mist, my phone buzzed with a message from Tyler. "County auditors are here. They're asking questions." I stared at those words for a long moment. The kind of moment where you don't smile, but something inside you unclenches. Later, he added, Karen didn't show up. I didn't need popcorn. The day was already entertaining itself. Around noon, a local reporter called me. "Mr. Schultz, we received confirmation that a financial review has been opened into Riverbend HOA. Would you like to comment?" "No," I said, "but I'll listen." She chuckled. "It looks messy, really messy." Messy was an understatement. By mid-afternoon, word had spread that the county auditor had flagged multiple irregularities in the HOA's financial system. Irregularities that lined up perfectly with the USB Tyler had handed me. Consultant fees, security operations, contractors paid off the books. Invoices labeled resolution strategy, community response, and unplanned compliance measures. Altogether, just a hair over $307,400. Worse, half of it had been approved without any board vote, and the other half had been buried under fake maintenance line items. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was fraud, and the county had seen enough. The HOA board held an emergency meeting that same night, which would have sounded more impressive if it weren't happening in a clubhouse built out of cheap stucco and leftover developer guilt. Residents filled every chair, standing rooms spilling out into the hallways. I didn't attend, didn't have to. I just sat on my porch with a cold drink and let the evening breeze deliver the echoes of raised voices across the road. I didn't catch every word, but I caught enough. "You lied to all of us." "Where's the money, Karen?" "The judge said criminal referral." "We trusted you." Trust is like a fence post. Once it snaps, you can't make it whole again, and you can only replace it. Apparently, that meeting ended with a motion to suspend Karen from the HOA presidency pending investigation. She refused. Of course she refused. People like Karen don't step down. They dig deeper, but digging doesn't help when the hole's already under your feet. The next morning, the county released a public statement confirming possible criminal violations under financial fraud statutes. Residents started knocking on my gate, not to argue, but to apologize. Some brought pie, some brought a handshake, some brought awkward half-smiles, and the kind of look people give when they know they backed the wrong horse. I accepted every apology, not because I needed them, but because forgiveness costs nothing, and grudges take work. The real show came 3 days later. I was welding a brace on my eastern fence line when I heard sirens, not fast, not frantic, just steady. I stood up and wiped my hands. A sheriff's SUV rolled into Clearwater Ridge, then another, then a county investigator's sedan. They didn't turn toward the clubhouse. They turned toward Karen Sterling's house. Her big, perfect HOA-approved home with the manicured shrubs and the custom door glass shaped like a pelican. Residents peeked out of windows. Some stepped onto porches. A few came outside with phones ready. Not antagonistic, just curious in that small-town way where everybody knows something is happening long before they understand what it is. Karen came out onto her porch wearing a white blouse and a smile that didn't fit her face. She said something about misunderstandings and procedural errors and politically motivated audits. The officers didn't argue. They stepped forward, read the charges: fraud, conspiracy to commit trespass, misappropriation of community funds, authorization of staged incidents, tampering with documents. When they placed the cuffs on her wrists, she gasped like someone had shut off her air supply. Not angry, not confused, just shocked. Shocked that reality had finally shown up with paperwork. One of the deputies guided her toward the SUV, and that's when it happened. The part nobody planned, the part nobody could have scripted better. A breeze picked up, and behind Karen, hanging from a simple metal frame, the HOA's decorative entrance sign rattled in the wind. Riverbend Estates, a community of trust. A neighbor stepped forward, filming. Someone else whispered, "Well, that didn't age well." Karen ducked her head, but the cameras caught everything. The walk of shame. The last glance at the sign she'd once stood in front of with pride. The cold realization that the community she claimed to protect was watching her leave in handcuffs. The HOA dissolved 2 weeks later. State decision, swift and absolute. The license revoked. All operations suspended. A temporary state-appointed overseer assigned to sort through the financial wreckage. Tyler turned down the nomination to lead the new board. Can't say I blamed him. He stopped by my place one evening, hands in his pockets, eyes tired but lighter than before. "I never wanted it to go this far," he said. "I know you didn't," I replied. "Do you hate us?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, but I'm keeping my gate closed." He smiled at that, a small, sincere smile. Fair enough. Life didn't snap back to normal overnight. It never does. But the quiet returned. The kind of quiet with no watchers, no intruders, no staged theatrics. Just dogs barking at nothing, wind through cedar branches, and the steady hum of an honest day's work. One afternoon, I poured fresh concrete along the eastern fence, set in anchor-grade steel bollards thick enough to stop a tank, installed solar lights, mounted a hand-painted sign: "No trespassing. Private land HOA is not the law." A local metal shop delivered a second sign. Polished, gold trim, a little too fancy for my taste, but I hung it anyway. Neighbors still visit sometimes, the ones who apologized, the ones who learned something from all this. I don't hold grudges, but my gate, it stays closed. There's a different kind of quiet that settles in after a long fight. Not the uneasy quiet you get when trouble's hiding in the brush. Not the heavy quiet that comes right before a storm. No. This is the quiet that sounds like a long exhale, like the land itself finally unclenched. Weeks passed after the arrest, then months. Time smoothed the edges of everything, even the anger. I kept doing what I'd always done, fixing what was broken, mending what needed mending, and working my land the way my grandfather taught me. Most mornings, I still walked the fence line with a mug of hot coffee, steam rising against the cool air. The dogs trotted beside me, noses to the wind, tails swinging like metronomes for a song only they could hear. Some days, I'd pause by the eastern fence, the very spot where the excavator had once crawled toward my property, where strangers had spray-painted crosses on my posts as if they owned the dirt under their boots. Now it was quiet, reinforced, solid. The solar lights flicked off when the sun hit them, and the new bollards cast long shadows across the gravel. They weren't pretty, but they were honest. And in a world full of pretense, honest things have their own kind of beauty. The mailbox filled with fewer HOA newsletters and more handwritten notes, some from neighbors across the road. "We just wanted to say thank you for handling this the way you did." Some from people I'd never met. "Saw your story on the news. You stood your ground. More folks need to." Some from younger families. "Sorry we judged you before knowing the facts." I kept them all in a drawer, not out of pride, but as a reminder. People make mistakes, communities make bigger ones, but sometimes, if you give them the truth straight and simple, they come around. Every now and then, I'd see a Clearwater Ridge resident walking their dog near the road. Some waved, some didn't. One older gentleman, the type who always wore suspenders and a hat, even when mowing, stopped at my fence one morning. "I misjudged you," he said plainly. "No harm done," I replied. He glanced at the fence, the gate, the open land stretching behind me. "You think things will be better now, without the HOA?" I shrugged. "I think people will either learn from it, or they won't." He chuckled, nodded, and kept walking. In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch, watching the sun melt behind the horizon, that orange and purple glow that makes even problems look smaller. Sometimes I'd hear distant traffic from the highway, or coyotes calling out beyond the brush, or wind rattling the old wind chimes my grandfather welded from spare tractor parts. I'd think about him a lot. What he would have said, what he would have thought about all this. Probably something simple like, "A boundary means something only if you're willing to defend it." He wasn't a complicated man. Most folks who work the land aren't. We don't need flowery speeches to understand right from wrong. A line is a line, a lie is a lie, and a gate is a gate. There were days after the court case when I wondered if all of this could have been avoided. If maybe I should have just taken the easement money. If maybe I should have kept my head down and ignored the trespasses, the threats, the games. But then I'd walk that quarter-mile stretch of gravel my grandfather carved by hand in 1967, the same stretch they wanted to claim, and I'd remember exactly why I stood firm. Not for spite, not for pride, but for the simple truth that this land was handed down, not handed over, and once you give away something you didn't earn, you'll never get it back again. Late one afternoon, Tyler stopped by. No official role anymore, just a man who'd climbed out of a hole before it swallowed him. He leaned against his truck and said, "You know, it's strange. The HOA acted like you were the enemy, but you might have saved this whole place." "How's that?" I asked. "If Karen kept going," he said softly, "we'd all be in debt, or in court, or worse. Sometimes the person holding the line is the one keeping everyone from going over a cliff." I didn't answer, didn't need to. He clapped my shoulder once before leaving, a man grateful to still have a future that wasn't behind bars. That night, as I walked to the gate to lock it, a breeze moved through the grass, soft, steady, carrying the smell of cedar and warm soil. The new sign reflected the porch light, gold trim glinting like a little piece of quiet revenge. I ran a hand along the cool metal, not out of pride, but closure. Before heading back to the house, I said something into the dark, not loud, not for anyone but the land itself. My land, my rules. The wind didn't answer. It didn't need to. Some things are settled forever once you've said them out loud.